Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Kedro Coffee Chat. Today, we have Ankita, who is going to speak about our major 1.0 updates, the redesigned DataCatalog. And the main thing to show you how to use it programmatically to demonstrate new pipeline aware commands and how to simplify your factories and understand the catalog config resolver, which aims to showcase you the information that was previously hidden from you. I'll quickly remind you about the format that we are doing. So that's the weekly coffee chat, where we usually have a guest or someone from a Kedro team to showcase a new feature or something that users asking in our Slack. And last 10 minutes, we allocate for asking the questions because we want to stay closer with our community. And we are always interested in what people are curious about. So we try to make these demos live. In case something goes wrong, send a support to the presenter. And as always, if you weren't able to join, then you can access all those streams on YouTube and LinkedIn. And on our Kedro Coffee Chat page, you can also access all the previous streams. And in case you have extra questions after the stream, you can always join our Slack, where you can find ourselves or community who is willing to help. And here I'll hand over to Ankita to start the main part.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Ankita. I'm a software engineer on Kedro. And today I wanted to talk about one of the major features, like Elena said, that we added for Kedro 1.0, which is the new data catalog. You can find all the docs related to the Kedro data catalog under this heading on the Kedro docs page, which I think we can share the link to. But yeah, I wanted to show you the new features that we've added for the data catalog. Now, if you've been using Kedro for a while, you use Kedro as a framework tool in your Kedro project, nothing should be different with the new data catalog. Most of the changes that we've made are on the API side, which is programmatically. So your Kedro project, your data catalog configuration goes in your catalog.yaml file as usual. And if you do Kedro run, everything should be as it always was. But I'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive on the catalog API and how to use it. Yeah, so the simplest way, there's a couple of ways to initialize the data catalog. The simplest way on your notebook, if you're working with a notebook, is to import the data catalog, initialize the data sets, import the data sets from Kedro data sets, and then initialize the data catalog using the constructor. And I'll be going through another way in a bit. And the major difference from the previous Kedro data catalog is that we have added a dictionary-like interface. So if you're familiar with the dictionary on Python, it should be very similar to that. So the way to add a new data catalog, to add a new data set to the catalog, all you need to do is add it using the set item way that you do in dictionaries. And then you can check that the catalog now contains shuttles as well. At first, it only had companies and reviews. You can get a data set in a similar way, also with the get function or with the get item functionality like a dictionary. This should return the data set object itself and not the data. And you could get the data like with the dataset.load function. This would give you the data itself, the table. We also have the contains function, which will tell you if a dataset exists in the catalog already or not. There are a couple of ways to iterate through datasets. If you need the dataset name as well as the dataset, you can go through it with catalog.items, again, similar to a dictionary. Otherwise, you can iterate through keys as well as the values, which should be the dataset object. Yeah, and we've also added this new function to filter datasets based on name matches or type matches, or like by exact type. So if you do catalog.filter for any name regular expression, it should give you the relevant dataset name from the catalog. Similarly, if you wanted to look for an Excel file, the Excel dataset type from the catalog, it'll be shuttles. And you can also filter by the exact dataset type if you know the Kedro dataset that you're looking for. We can also serialize the catalog into a dictionary type to extract the configuration that the catalog was created with. So we've added this toConfig function, which gives you a tuple of the config itself, which is a dictionary, which should be similar to what you would have in your catalog.yaml. Credentials, if there are any, the load versions as well as the save versions. This is how you can extract them. And then you could use these to create a new data catalog with the configuration, credentials, load version, and save version. So you can serialize and deserialize the data catalog with this new functionality. We also have this new API which will tell you the dataset type of a particular dataset in your catalog. So this is all about the new API that the Kedro dataset, the Kedro catalog has now, that you might find useful if you're using Kedro programmatically in your notebooks as a library in general. What I also wanted to go through is like do a little bit of a refresher on the dataset factories feature that we added in 0.18 series, where you can minimize the number of similar entries in your data catalog by using patterns called dataset factories. So for example, this these two data sets have very similar configuration and very similar names, and these could be generalized into a dataset factory which looks something like this. Instead of having two entries, we could have one entry. Let me comment this out. So here, what Kedro does is when it's trying to read pre-processed underscore companies, it will try to look for the exact entry in your catalog.yaml. If that does not exist, it will check for patterns that sort of match the dataset name, and then it will use this configuration and fill out the placeholders here with the matched name. So this feature has also been existing in the data catalog for a while now, but things have changed a little bit behind the scenes. What you need to know is there's three different types of dataset factories. So one of them, the first one is like this, the user-defined dataset factory that is supposed to match like some specific datasets. We can also add a catch-all pattern, which would be something like everything inside curly brackets. this would serve as your default data set, wherein any data set that is not explicitly defined in your catalog.yaml would be falling under this category. And the third one is what Kedro adds behind the scenes, which is the runtime default pattern, which depends on the kind of runner that you're using for your Kedro run. So for example, with the sequential runner, this would be a memory data set where any data set not defined in your catalog.yaml is used, is considered a memory data set. I could add this catch-all pattern to save all the data sets that would be memory data sets as CSV files here. So now that I have these two data sets, what I could do is maybe go into the Kedro IPython interactive environment and show you how you can access some of the catalog functionality and use them to resolve your factory patterns. So now the catalog has this component called the config resolver, which essentially is responsible for matching your dataset name to the dataset factory pattern that exists. Let's see, some of the functionalities would be, we have this list patterns function, which will give you all the factory patterns that exist in your catalog. This one that I define, the catch-all pattern that is used instead of the memory data set here, and the default pattern which comes from the Kedro runner, which is used if this one did not exist. Another thing I can do is to see if if I wanted to match a dataset name, the concrete dataset name to a factory pattern, it would tell me that it matches this pattern. I could also resolve the configuration directly with this function, resolve pattern, and this would give me the configuration for the dataset. Yep. So with the new catalog, we've also added some CLI commands to go with it, which would help you with your dataset factory resolution. The first one is Kedro Catalog list patterns, which does the same thing as the function that I showed you. It would tell you a list of the dataset factory patterns that exist in your catalog. This again is ordered in the name by the ranking order that Kedro uses to match your dataset to a certain factory. Yep. The next command is Kedro catalog resolve patterns. Which gives me my data catalog configuration all resolved. So as you can see, these data sets, the testing and training data sets, which would have been memory data sets without the catch-all pattern, are now CSV data sets. Similarly, the pre-processed companies and pre-processed shuttles is using the dataset factory that I defined, which was the Parquet dataset. There's another command called Kedro catalog describe data sets, which tells you basically tells you all the data sets that are mentioned in various pipelines. You can also filter by different pipelines, but for example, for the default pipeline, all the data sets, the matplotlib writer dataset, and which concrete data sets fall under this category. For example, the CSV data sets is reviews and companies, and it is divided by the data sets that are explicitly mentioned in your catalog, the default data sets, which use the catch-all pattern, as well as the data sets that come from dataset factories. You can also filter by pipeline here to make things easier if you wanted to check for specific pipelines. Yep. Yeah, so that's about the dataset factories. And very quickly, I wanted to also go through how would you use these different components that Kedro has, the data catalog, the config loader, to run your pipeline programmatically by initializing these components separately. So the first thing that we do is like configure our project. This will load up the pipelines and the settings that you have in your project. And then we import the Omega config loader and then the data catalog. This is essentially what the Kedro session does when you do a Kedro run behind the scenes. So we load the configuration using the Omega config loader. This will have the catalog, the parameters, the credentials, as well as logging configuration. And then so this is another way of initializing the data catalog using the class function from config, where you load the YAML configuration using the config loader and then initialize the data catalog. This is what the data catalog looks like for me right now. It does not contain the dataset factory patterns just because we haven't initialized the pipeline yet. And these data sets are loaded in a lazy fashion. So when Kedro runner wants to run the node which outputs the pre-processed company's pipeline, it will ask the catalog, and at that point catalog will resolve the configuration from the dataset factory and then load this dataset. So these are all the concrete datasets in my catalog at the moment. I have also loaded the parameters and I will inject that into the catalog so that my pipeline can run. Now I load up my pipelines and this is what it looks like. We have the default pipeline containing all the nodes and then the 3 individual pipelines that we've had. I initialize the sequential runner and I want to run my default pipeline. So I'm gonna pick that pipeline up from the default pipeline, and then you can do runner.run and pass it the pipeline in the catalog, which essentially will run your pipeline. And what you get as the output of runner.run are the data sets that were defined as the outputs for this this pipeline. So essentially, you receive a dictionary of the outputs and then the data sets, and to load the output, you could do runner output dummy confusion matrix dot load. Anyway, this will give you a plotly figure. Yep. So this is how Kedro works behind the scenes, and this is how you could also run your pipelines on a notebook or in a Python script, for example. And yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ankita. This was the end of main part, and I remind you to ask your questions in the channel or in the chat for YouTube and LinkedIn. And the whole point of this redesign of this work was to address your feedback and make this catalog faster, cleaner, and easier to use. So let us know how it feels compared to what it was. And if you need any help to migrate from the old Kedro version to the new one, you can always find us in Slack. Until we wait. Okay, I see a few questions. Let me show them. The question from Merrill, do you have advice on when to use dataset factories and when not to use them?
I think dataset factories are very useful when you have a lot of data sets with similar configurations and you don't want to list out everything. It's also quite useful for this catch-all pattern thing that I showed before, where you want to set a default data set, which used to be quite hard to do when before we added this feature, there was no way to define a default data set that you would use and try to save all the intermediate data sets that are generated. Yeah, when not to use them and you have very different data sets, there's nothing to combine into a single entry.
Okay, and another one from Dmitry about the old API and how long will it work?
Well, I believe as long as you stay on 0.19 series, the old catalog API should work. But with Kedro 1.0, we only have the new data catalog API.
Yeah, so like after we made 1.0 release, we stopped maintaining the old API. Though if you're using your catalog like as a normal user with the framework itself, then you shouldn't feel the difference at all. It only comes in place when you're using Python API, which intersects with the previous catalog API, but it also has some changes and updates which could be found in our docs page, saying like what was deprecated and what API we advise to use as a replacement. And we have now a question. Thank you for the presentation. What would be the best practices for maintaining different paths for different environments, dev prod?
Yeah, so the Kedro configuration allows you to define different environments, right? So the base environment would contain everything that remains constant within your different environments, and then you could define different environments which could contain overwriting configuration for these data sets, which, for example, in production, you want to use the data from an S3 bucket, you would define that in your production environment. And if you wanted to run locally, you could overwrite the same entry with a local path. Kedro only allows for two environments at a time, so you would always have the base environment and then the the second, the run environment could be local or prod or development. Ideally, configuration is the way that Kedro loads the configuration. It loads the base environment first and then overrides certain things with the run environment. So I would recommend having overwriting entries rather than trying to share configuration between those environments. But you could do that with globals. It's easier when the entire dataset entry, for example, is overwritten by something to avoid confusion.
All right. Any other questions coming? We still have 4 minutes to address them.
Maybe Elena, you have some best practices for different environments that I missed.
Yeah, I guess like we haven't touched the config loader with this release because it was quite new component, and everything that was in place before remained in 1.0 version. But I would also say that we recommend splitting the environments in case it's possible, even though we have a way of merging all those configurations. But as Ankita mentioned before, in case your project is getting bigger, sometimes it's tricky to understand what end configuration you'll get after the merging. So if possible, and you can do that, it's better to split and overwrite. All right, that's then wrap up. Thank you, Ankita, for presenting us the data catalog updates, and we hope to get some user feedback soon. As always, if you have any questions, reach out in Slack, and see you in 2 weeks. Until the next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.